Hi everyone, lovely to see you all joining us for today's Lunch and Learn session. I'm Lauren, I work in the marketing team at CXPartners. So if you've not been to one of these sessions before, the purpose of this series is to offer a program of learning to our clients. And not only does it mean that we can share some of our knowledge and expertise with you, but it'll mean that you can get more out of the work that we're doing together. So this month, we'll be diving into how to plan and facilitate great workshops, and I'll hand over to our speaker, Henry, in just a moment. We'll be running more sessions in the new year, and we'll send out details about these in the coming weeks. We'd love to hear from you, though. As always, it's great to get your feedback, so please drop your thoughts in the chat or email them over to us at marketing@cxpartners.co.uk, which you should all have in your inbox. Let us know if the time works well for you, if you like the format, and if there are any particular topics you'd like to see us cover in the future. So moving on to today's session, our speaker today is Henry Bacon. Henry is a UX consultant with a passion for research and user-centered design. He's worked in digital design for almost a decade and loves to see great user experiences lead to great business outcomes. So before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that this is a one-way webinar, so no one can see you or hear you. So feel free to eat your lunch without the fear that we can see you. And finally, if you have anything you'd like to ask throughout the session, please do add it to the chat or the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and then I'll pop back at the end and we can go through any questions. So handing over to you, Henry.
Cool. Thanks, Lauren. So yeah, hey everyone, nice to sort of digitally meet you all. As Lauren said, my name's Henry. I'm a UX consultant here at CXPartners, and I'm going to talk today about how to plan and run great workshops. And hopefully today, whether you're completely new to the world of workshops or you're an experienced workshopper, facilitator, you'll find something useful to take away and use going forward. So to give you a bit more of a detailed agenda, first of all, I'll give a brief introduction to what workshops are for those who may be new to them. I'll then talk about the benefits that we've seen when they're run effectively. I'll share 3 of our favorite workshops to run here at CXPartners. And then finally, I'll just share some sort of bite-sized and very practical tips that you can take going forward when running your own workshops. And throughout this, please share, if you've got your own workshop tips that work for you in the past, please share with them with everyone in the chat. We'd love to hear them, along with any questions that you might have, and we can do our best to answer those at the end. So without further ado, what are workshops? So for anyone who's never seen or taken part in a workshop before, I'll just give a brief description of what they are. So this is a definition I borrowed from Norman Nielsen, and I think it's pretty robust. So workshops are a structured group session that brings together individuals to collaboratively solve problems, generate ideas, and make decisions. And I think the 2 words to pull out here, the 2 key points are structured. So workshops differ to meetings in that they are composed of specific activities. And it's the role of the facilitator to set those activities and then guide participants through them. And the other point is that they're collaborative. And that's the most important bit. We're working together on something and actively making decisions or coming up with ideas. We're not just talking about work, which is what you might see, what happens in a typical work meeting. We're actually rolling up our sleeves and together getting stuck into something and doing actual work. So why are workshops important? Why should we pay attention to them? Well, in the digital industry, in the world today, workshops are happening everywhere and every day. They are exceedingly common. Over the past few years, perhaps supported by the rise of Agile, the increase in remote working, workshops have become a day-to-day tool for groups of people to work collaboratively. And at CXPartners, as a consultancy, we've seen this for ourselves. We work with businesses from around the world in all sorts of industries, from energy supplies to clothing brands, public services. They're all using workshops, and we're helping them run workshops. to make better products and better decisions. And the reason is because well-run workshops bring multiple benefits. So they increase communication within teams, which is especially important now in today's sort of typical remote working world in the digital industry. They help build a shared sense of product ownership within a product team. And this is something I've really seen happen with product teams, because workshops are a space where everyone gets to contribute, to share their ideas and have a say in decisions. I've seen this leads to much more motivated and invested product team members. And builds just a more tight-knit team, basically. They're a great space for creativity and innovation. So when you have a multidisciplinary group of individuals generating and refining solutions together, then the ideas that come out are far more innovative often than if people worked in isolation. And finally, great workshops are great at establishing team alignment. So, within workshops, you're sharing information, you're asking questions and building a shared understanding of maybe user needs or what problem is you're trying to solve. And then you're aligning on, ways forward, next steps, ways of working, and it gets everyone just really on the same page and really aligned, and with that same level of understanding. So that's another of the benefits, but there are multiple benefits. So I'll share with you now 3 of mine and my colleagues' favorite workshops to run here at CX, to illustrate further what workshops are to those perhaps who are new to it, but also giving everyone some ideas for workshops they can run with in the future. And you'll notice these workshops are geared for different stages of a project timeline, from team formation on day 1 to planning and discovery phase to post-discovery sort of ideation and coming up with solutions. And really the point is I want to highlight is that you can run workshops at any point in a project and they can bring real benefits. So the first one I'd like to share is called the team design workshop. And the team design workshop is one that's really valuable to run at the start of a project, because it creates team alignment on some really important things such as project goals, roles and responsibilities, how the team's going to work together, how the team's going to track progress or perceive project risks. Really, as a facilitator, you can set these things and decide what the things are that you really want the team to align on at the start of a project. And the format is very simple. You as facilitator put these points out to participants and then create a safe space, a welcoming space where these can be talked about openly, discussed, and then aligned on. And at the end of it, the team has a social contract. You can collate these into a sort of social contract, which they can come back to throughout the project. The next workshop I'll share is 5 W's and an H workshop. So the W stand for who, what, when, where, and why, and the H stands for how. So this is a great workshop to run at the start of discovery. I found it really useful for generating team discussion on what and where our biggest unknowns are, and then working out how we're going to uncover those. And like the last one, it's very simple. It involves pulling out these words onto a board, and then you invite participants to write down questions about the project that they think it's important to find the answers to, that begin with these words. For example, they're looking at who are our biggest user group, for example. And it's surprising how useful these words are as acting as prompts to spark ideas within your team members' heads. They're really useful and surprisingly effective. And once everyone's had a period of time, you might set 5 to 10 minutes to write down their questions. You then invite participants to share them. See where there's consensus, and then finally, you can focus on those and decide as a team how you're going to find the answers to those throughout discovery. So this is a really, again, really simple workshop, but I found it to be really useful to run. Next one is the 1, 2, 4 all workshop. And my colleague shared this one with me and said that he's found it a great way to generate ideas from a large group of participants. So it's generating ideas as well as synthesizing them, and it's done in a way that's very easy for you to manage as facilitator. So it begins with an agreed problem statement, such as how might we increase customer loyalty, and then you as facilitator give time to participants to work on their own individually to generate ideas that they think might solve that. And after a few minutes, you then put them in pairs. And in those pairs, they then share their ideas with one another, discuss them. Perhaps it sparks new ideas between them. And then they take their favorite ideas to move forward. And then you put those pairs into groups of 4. And the process sort of repeats. And then finally, you ask those teams of 4 to share their favorite ideas with the room. And the beauty of this process is that it makes it very easy for you as facilitator to manage that ideation and synthesis process when you have a large group, because it can otherwise get quite challenging and quite demanding for you. If you can imagine, the alternative might be allowing everyone to pull out their initial ideas on, on Post-its on the board, and then having participants talk through each and every one of them. With this workshop, the number of ideas will have reduced already by the end of the process. So once you've done that big share out, after them working groups of 4s, you might only have 5 to 10 ideas to discuss as a whole group and perhaps prioritize. So that creation and the synthesis process is happening simultaneously in each round. And because you're also breaking people into little groups, it's also an effective way to mitigate the risk of 1 or 2 people dominating the conversation, the largest voice in the room sort of scenario. So it can help deal with that. So that was 3 workshops, which hopefully might inspire some activities that you can take away and try in your own projects. And now for the next part, I'm just going to share with you some practical bite-sized tips which you can apply to hopefully to pretty much to any workshop, and hopefully be of use to you. So planning your workshop, this is the most important part. You'll see that the majority of the tips that I shared today are around the planning of your workshop. And this is because when it comes to workshops, planning is the most important part. And lack of due planning is the number 1 reason why workshops fail. And by fail, I mean they fail to achieve their sort of intended outcome. And it's because most of the time, the facilitator didn't put enough time into planning it, or gave themselves too little time. So these tips here, which I'll share with you today, can sort of help mitigate that and help ensure the planning is rock solid. So the first question to ask yourself is a workshop the best way of reaching your desired outcome? And first of all, this is good because it forces you to get really clear on what the outcome is that you're after, which you need to be, especially if you're going to run a workshop on it. And secondly, it stops you just diving straight into organizing your activities and working out your workshop, when sometimes a meeting might be fine and it might be the better option. If you want just to have a general discussion, it might be a meeting does the job. And there's benefits to doing it because they're generally a lot easier and a lot faster to organize. But if you want rapid ideation, say, or come to group decision on something, discussion and prioritization, then a workshop might indeed be your best bet. But it's good just to check beforehand at the start, is this the best way forward? Second is to give yourself plenty of time to prepare. It often takes longer than you think to prepare a workshop. And as I said earlier, the number one reason why workshops fail is because the facilitator didn't give themselves enough time to prepare. So there's a number of things to do. You'll likely need to, you have to choose activities and work those out, plan the timings, prepare whiteboards, be it real or digital. So there's a number of things you need to sort of sort out. A good rule of thumb is to give yourself 30 minutes of preparation per participant. So if you've got 10 people coming to the workshop, give yourself 5 hours to prepare. Or another rule of thumb I've heard is that your preparation time is going to be equivalent to however long the workshop is. So if it's half a day workshop, you're going to need to give yourself half a day's preparation, time to prepare it. Next is to think really carefully about numbers. By that I mean the number of participants you invite to the workshop, because more isn't always better. More people can make for a more stressful and more work for yourself. And it can also make a situation that perhaps isn't as good for participants as well as if you had smaller groups. So for you as facilitator, it feels like the stakes are generally much higher. And arguably it is, because if you have a very large workshop, it's a lot more collective time that you're using, in people's calendars. So you want to be really sure that it goes well. And you also need to be really sure that your activities are robust enough and designed in such a way that they're going to be able to work well with the input of a lot of people. And for participants, it can be more scary. For some participants might find it to share their thoughts and opinions and speak to a larger audience than if it was a small group, maybe sort of like between 5 to 10. It can feel a bit more like public speaking for them, and they might be less likely to sort of share their thoughts and ideas on things. So generally, we find here sort of 5 to 10 participants for a workshops works best. One thing that's quite useful to do sometimes is, if you're really sure you need to have maybe like 30 people have an input into a decision or something like that, is ask yourself, could I break it down into multiple smaller workshops rather than do one big one? Because the whole experience just might be easier and better for yourself and also the participants. So worth asking yourself that too. Next is, don't try and squeeze too much into a workshop. It's surprisingly easy to give yourself too little time when planning it rather than too much. And by that, too little time for the whole workshop to run rather than too much. And it's a really easy mistake to make. A surprising amount of time gets eaten away by things like waiting for people to join the call who are perhaps late, initial conversation with participants just to make people feel welcome, waiting for people to load up that Miro board or mural board that you've sent them the link to, or explaining activities. Things like this take up a surprising amount of time. And if you haven't allocated for that, I'd say generally I try and go for an extra 15 to 30 minutes. Then it's really easy to find yourself short on time during the workshop. And that can just make it feel rushed. You might have to skip valuable points of conversation, discussion, and also just a really abrupt ending, which is surprisingly easy to find yourself in that situation. So generally, I'd say give yourself more time rather than less, and do fewer activities and do them well than trying to cram too much into a workshop. And simple activities work better. This is something we found here at CX. So simple activities require less explanation. So there's less work there on your part. They cause less confusion, and you get better results generally. You want people to be thinking about the problem, right? The situation, what you want them to think about, not whether they're doing it right or whether they've understood you correctly, or being slightly confused about the whole thing. So you want to pick simple activities, and I found what I do is generally use pre-made ones, tried and tested activities. They're really easy to find on the internet. You can look on Norman Nielsen website or the Miro community, or even the FigJam community. There's a lot of tried and tested setup activities out there, which are really good just to check out when planning your workshop. Another good tip is just before the workshop, try to explain your activity to a colleague beforehand and see how easy it is for them to understand. And then you can gauge it from that. So yeah, definitely use simple activities. Next is when you're deciding whether to do it remote or in person, or perhaps hybrid. Well, with remote or in person, we find there's benefits to both. So with remote, obviously, it's much easier for people to attend. There's less traveling. It's a lot less time for them, the whole workshop, because they're not having to do that traveling there and back. It's easier to organize for you. You're not having to think about a physical venue for everyone to get to, or providing food or anything like that. And they're also more accessible and inclusive. So, if there's anyone with any mobility needs or anything like that, a remote workshop obviously can be much easier for them. But in-person workshops, I found they're really great at the start of a project for people getting to know one another. It's easier for people just to meet people in person. They can see all the body language. There's no cameras off. It's a great way for teams just to get to know each other. But as I put here, hybrid workshops, generally we try and avoid them if we can. They can be a real faff to make them work well. There's risks around people on Zoom not being able to get a good view of the whiteboard, or hear conversations that are happening between people in the room, or just you worry about them feeling a little bit marginalized. So I would suggest either just have it all remote or all in person if you can. If you do go remote, remember to plan the technology and put some time to working this out and getting prepared. Problems with technology can derail your workshop from the start, which isn't a great experience for you as facilitator or your participants. So some key things to think about here are, what tech do your activities require? Do you need digital whiteboards? Do you need the ability to record, things like that? What are participants used to? So maybe you're working with a company that everyone uses Miro all the time. So obviously that is more sensible to go with that than something like Mural, because you're not going to have to explain how to use it to people during the workshop. So it's worth finding that out. What do participants have access to? So a lot of companies might have quite strict security policies on not using certain services. So maybe like no one uses Google Meet in a company. So it's worth finding that out too, rather than on the day. And also, will they need anything else? So maybe if you're doing an ideation session, maybe you're running a Crazy Eights workshop, you want people to bring pens, paper, maybe their smartphones if you're going to need them to take photos of their sketches. So you just need to think all this stuff through and make sure you're considering what they do and don't have access to and what's easy for them. And also just tell people in advance what they need to bring and what service can be using. Another little tip here is, I always forget this, remember to check the permissions on specific digital whiteboards. So if you're using Miro and you send a link out to people, you don't want loads of people coming back saying, hey, it's asking me for a password, or it's not giving me access to it. So just check the sharing settings you have for those whiteboards at the start. It's surprisingly easy to forget that, or it is for me. So hopefully there's a few tips there you can use when preparing your next workshop. And that's arguably half the work done for you as a facilitator. If you're all set up correctly, you can just focus now on running the workshop and enjoy seeing it all run smoothly. I've got 4 more tips for you now, all of which are for when you're actually running the workshop, which hopefully will help you further. So first of all, make sure you start by really clearly setting the scene. You don't want to just dive straight into the first activity. You don't want people wondering why they're there, why you've asked them, what the overall point of this is, or what's going to happen throughout the day. So if you have people feeling like that, it can just decrease confidence in the whole affair and just impact their engagement. So make sure at the start you set out really clearly what the purpose of it is and why they're there. I find the POP format works well. So it stands for purpose, outcome, process. So make it clear why you're running the workshop, the end goal you're striving for, and then the activities that everyone's going to take part in. And if you do that, generally people can just feel they get more engaged with it. They understand that there's value in this whole thing is worth doing, and they'll become more engaged. It's also a good opportunity at the start to stress that it's a safe space. There's no stupid questions or dumb ideas. Everyone's voice is respected. You know, those sorts of things too, which can really help put people at ease. Another useful tactic is to, at the start, ask for volunteers to help you facilitate. So things like, who would like to ensure everyone's voice is heard? Who can help ensure that we stick to the agenda? Who wants to help me ensure that we keep our users' needs center stage? So this is really handy, as not only in a sort of gentle way is it reminding people of how you'd like them to sort of behave throughout the workshop, i.e. don't talk over people or dominate the conversation. But it also helps build a sense that if you have some volunteers take it up, that it's now a shared workshop and you have co-facilitators, and that we all own it and are responsible for the outcome. So it can really help, again, to get people more engaged and just take some of the work off you as facilitator. During workshops, I would recommend allowing time for individual thought and ideation before coming back as a group together to share those and discuss those. It's a really handy way of mitigating the risk of groupthink, or the loudest voice in the room dominating the space, or perhaps quieter people's ideas being missed. And you can use this method in a variety of workshops, whether you're gathering people's thoughts on the project's biggest assumptions or ideas on solutions, or what teams should feel they should prioritize. Just doing this sort of diverging and then sort of coming back together, it works really well. And finally, it's my last tip for you all today, is to leave enough time for a decent ending. And by that, I mean unrushed and nicely paced. It's so easy in workshops to pack too many activities in and then have to abruptly end the call at the end. And that can leave people wondering, like, well, what's going to happen next? Or, it's just a bit of a funny vibe to end on. So I would suggest give yourself enough time for the ending. And in that ending, doing these 3 things I find to be effective. So you can summarize the key takeaways from the workshop, and just that helps ensure alignment and that you've understood everything. in the same way that other people are. Outline next steps. You can have a bit of discussion of those. And perhaps the most important, thank everyone. And if you do those things, you'll finish on a high, and it will be people sort of enduring memory of the whole workshop. And if you do it well, they'll be more likely to come to your next one. So on that note, I'd like to thank you all for listening. And I hope there was some useful and practical tips in there, which you'll find helpful when running your next workshops. And yeah, for the next part, I'd love to hear about your own tips. If there's some which you're happy to share and you find useful, and also try and answer any questions you may have. So I'll hand back to you, Lauren.
Great. Thank you so much, Henry. That was brilliant. And yeah, loads of great tips in there. And yeah, as Henry said, please do kind of add any tips to the chat, and then also any questions or anything like that you want to ask Henry, add them to the chat or the Q&A now. I know we've had one tip through that says, I really like the workshop rule, make space for everyone. I think that's a really nice thing to kind of keep in mind when running workshops.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. It's really important as facilitator that you try and give everyone space to have a voice and make a contribution. Definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I can see we've had one question through already, actually, so we can jump straight into that. And yeah, if anyone else has any more, please do add them in. So the first question we've had is, how do you get people to stay engaged with workshops when you're running them?
I think one thing to keep in mind there is energy levels. So if you're running, long workshops, longer than 45 minutes, I think having breaks is really important, because otherwise people's energy levels can take a dip. So definitely having breaks helps people come back, refreshed and reinvigorated and enthused to take part in the next activities you might have. And also just breaking people up into teams, or having time to work individually. Doing those sort of things can also help people engage, because it stops them from becoming just sort of passive, almost like members of the audience. It ensures they're taking part, they're coming up with ideas, they're engaged in the whole thing. So yeah, those your activities and also taking breaks, they're two things that come to mind.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Actually, this next question follows on quite nicely. It's, what are your favorite icebreakers?
I like ones where, two truths and a lie is always fun. Also helps people get to know each other a bit and can create a bit of laughter around some ridiculous ones that people write. People just putting down what they had for breakfast on a Miro board. That's also quite handy, because it checks people know how to use the service. Like if you're using Miro, it's like a good little practice for them to put down post-its, and also it's quite good fun. Things like that, really. I mean, icebreakers, I think they're good when people are unfamiliar with each other or haven't done much work together in the past. I think often if you're in a team that's really tight knit and you're talking with each other all the time, you don't need to worry so much about icebreakers. Often it can feel a bit like, why are we doing this? Why can't we just get stuck into it? So yeah, worth keeping that in mind too.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's such a great point. We've had another one here about, would you suggest doing a workshop in person or remotely? I know you kind of touched on the benefits of both, but yeah, is there kind of one you'd sort of you'd recommend more so than the other?
I think it depends on the circumstances. To be honest, that classic answer, it depends. I think if you've got a team where everyone's spread all around the country, or maybe in different countries, obviously you're probably going to have to go remote. Think about people in your team who might have accessibility issues or difficulties traveling. Then it might be remote's a better option. I think in person can work well. If it's a new team and you want people to get to know one another, as the same presentation. Or equally, if it's a longer workshop, so maybe it's like a half day workshop or a day workshop, or maybe it's a few days, then I think coming together in person work really well, because almost it justifies then the traveling time and the extra work that people have to put in to get there, to get to your physical venue. But for shorter workshops that maybe an hour or 2 hours or something, I'd probably generally lean towards remote most of the time.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Thank you. I think that's all the questions we've had. So unless anyone else kind of quickly wants to drop in another one, I guess we can wrap up there. I just want to say a massive thank you for today's session, Henry, and sharing all your workshopping knowledge. Oh, sorry, one more question has just come up actually. What activities keep people moving rather than sitting?
To keep people moving, that's an interesting one. So often they are mainly sitting. I think if you're having it in person, obviously that's easier. You can invite people to come up to the whiteboard and put their ideas and discuss it in front of people, or breaking out into little teams, and you can have them working around tables. For remote workshops, I think that's a bit more challenging. I think maybe just giving people lots of breaks so they can get up and walk around. I think it's hard to do activities in remote ones that ensure people are moving. But yeah, maybe breaks are a good opportunity to do that when remote.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Okay, nice. Yeah, as I was saying, sorry. Thank you so much for today, Henry. It's been a really great session, and also thank you to everyone for coming along. As I mentioned earlier, we'd love to hear your feedback on today's session and also just kind of any future sessions. And then we also really hope to see you at next month's talk. Yeah, thank you, everyone. See you later.
So everyone.